Hello and welcome to Media7, I'm Russell Brown. Asperger's syndrome is a condition of the brain, a milder form of autism characterised by a difficulty in reading social signals and unorthodox modes of thinking and learning. Asperger people are overrepresented in statistics for imprisonment, mental illness and divorce, but also in the ranks of the sciences and technology. The condition was only added to the diagnostic manual in 1993, and the jury is still out on the reason for a sharp rise in the number of cases seen since, and even whether there really has been a rise in cases. The cover story of the new North and South magazine, sweetly timed for Brain Week, provides a rare look at the realities of what it describes as the world's most misunderstood syndrome, most notably in schools. As we'll see, not all the media around this topic is as welcome. Most of the time when you hear about autism or its milder variant Asperger's syndrome on the news, it means one of two things. Either it's another round of the endless battle between people who say autism is caused by vaccines or environmental toxins, and the large majority of doctors and scientists who say it isn't. Notable recently, the belated damning to hell by Britain's General Medical Council of claims by Dr. Andrew Wakefield that the MMR vaccine caused autism in children.
The allegations against me and against my colleagues are both unfounded and unjust. And I invite anyone to examine the contents of these proceedings and come to their own conclusions.
Which ain't good enough for celebrity autism parents Jim Carrey and Jenny McCarthy, who enjoy a perennial media platform to air vaccine and biomed theories.
We want to empower parents to educate themselves. Do we need to have the chickenpox? Do we need the hepatitis B shot on the second day of life?
I don't think we can afford to assume that the people who are charged with our public health any longer have our best interests at heart all the time.
Alternatively, autism in the news means that someone with Asperger's has naively hacked an important computer system and is in a power of trouble with the Americans. Like Briton Gary McKinnon, who hacked US military computers looking for UFOs and is running out of appeals against deportation to the land that gave us extraordinary rendition. Or Waikato boy Owen Walker, master of global botnets, unwitting servant of fraudsters.
The police are going to offer you a job.
They might. I don't know yet.
You'd be interested if they did?
Yes.
And now, the face of security at Telstra Clear. Sometimes you'll see people who are on the autistic spectrum in documentaries, like this one made by Top Shelf.
When I was younger, I didn't have any time for the games that people played, like at puberty when they were sort of trying to chat up chicks or something like that. I missed all that. I missed a whole lot of things. And it's only later on in life that, as some of these things have been pointed out to me, that I've connected up with things like feelings and emotions and communication.
Or on the Attitude program.
Some people, now, I don't think they care to admit it, but they probably think I'm weird. And I'm okay with that. Weird is good.
But very rarely will you see a story about the hard choices facing schools and the parents of autistic kids in an environment where there is neither the funding or the vision to deliver the education these children were promised. And that's a real story. And yes, that was my own son, Jimmy Ray Brown, explaining why weird is good there. He and his brother are both Asperger's. Joining me now are the Deputy Editor of North and South and the writer of that cover story, Joanna Wayne.
Russell.
Internet consultant Helen Baxter, whose formal diagnosis as Asperger followed her self-diagnosis as an adult, and Edwin McRae, the Shortland Street storyliner who oversaw the development of the character of Dr. Gabrielle Jacobs, the Aspie Doctor. Welcome to you all. Now, Joanna, congratulations on the story. I think it's very good. How did you come to write it?
Well, Russell, it's just suddenly seemed that Asperger's was everywhere, from Boston Legal to Shortland Street. And last year I was talking to a couple of friends, one a primary school teacher and one a speech therapist, who both first went into primary schools in the early 80s and said in those days you might have nobody in a class who was labelled with some kind of behavioural syndrome, and now there are 3 or 4. And they thought that maybe it was being used a bit loosely by parents or teachers to explain away bad behaviour, just naughty kids. That's not necessarily what I found in the story.
That's not what you found. That's interesting, because there's been a bit of comment along those lines lately. What did you find?
I think that nobody knows much about Asperger's. We're just learning about it. Teachers, I don't think we can expect them to know any more about it than we do. And sometimes the way kids behave, it's easy to misunderstand as bad behaviour because they're obstructional, they might be disruptive, they might not do what they're told, they might act out and have meltdowns, and you just think it's kids having tantrums. But once you understand what's going on in their heads, they're not deliberately doing it to cause problems. It's just that they're not reading the situation that well.
Are some schools better equipped to deal with this than others? Do some schools know more about it than others?
Yeah, I think we expect an awful lot of our schools, from kids who aren't having breakfast in the morning to dyslexia, and I think it really comes down to individual teachers. Some parents had really positive stories. There'd be a teacher who'd ring a kid on a Sunday evening and talk about what was going to happen the next day, and so that it was all really structured. Parents say that some teachers are okay if their kid wants to sit under the desk for the whole of the classroom lesson, but other teachers are terrible, and there've been really bad confrontations. Kids who talk about coming home and wanting to kill themselves, 7 or 8 year olds who are that distressed or who hurt and hit themselves because they're not coping.
Did you get anywhere near an understanding of why this apparently suddenly is a problem and wasn't, say, in 1980?
Yeah, I think in the old days they talked about some of these people might have gone off to a convent or a
special class.
Yeah, a special class, or they would have just been seen as the eccentric kids who were the train spotters, and there's always been a few of those around. But also life was a lot more structured, and so was the classroom. You know, the days where you sat there and did what you were told and wrote down what was on the blackboard, and now it's a lot more fluid and changing, and we don't all go to church on Sunday and have fish on Friday nights, and I think the whole environment we live in is a lot more challenging and harder for Asperger's kids to function in.
What's the response been to the story?
Yeah, really positive. I think most people who have anything to do with Asperger's are just glad it's getting an airing, and a decent airing where it's not played for laughs, like maybe the Boston Legal character.
The Boston Legal character, I have to say, we'll get to this later on, but really annoys me, actually.
Yeah, I love him. But, you know, I don't think he's necessarily reflective of the reality of Asperger's, and apparently his character also has Tourette's syndrome, which accounts for the purrs and the tics and the hopping.
Which is very handy for the screenwriter, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Helen, you self-diagnosed as an adult. Was that because when you were younger there was no such diagnosis?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was actually picked up as being unusual at 3 and then again at 9 because I was having a few learning difficulties, especially with maths, because I actually have dyscalculia, numerical dyslexia. So I was very fortunate to go to a school that had a special needs unit in the centre, so they're very used to working with lots of different learning styles. Yes, it's very difficult to get diagnosis as an adult. Very much so, and I was very lucky to go to the Starfish Clinic in Auckland, and yeah, just had it reconfirmed last month.
Because some people are going to look at you and think she's bright and articulate, what's the problem?
Yeah, that's right, but as I say, on a bad day I turn into Mrs. Flappy. But no, I was really lucky as well that because I was picked up at 9 and I was given speech and drama lessons, so I actually have learnt to act normal. I was a very gawky child.
So it's a matter of acting normal?
Very much so, and that's very tiring as well. I do find that when I've had to do lots of people time, I have to have decompression time where I just sit in a room on my own, read a book, quiet time, and that's very, very important.
Do you feel that you've, even though you weren't diagnosed early, that you have grown into an era where it's okay to be the way you are?
Definitely. I mean, I was fortunate that I got into the internet industry at quite a young age, and in my world, pretty much everyone's a little bit Aspergery. But yeah, I think it is a lot easier now, and I mean, in some ways, I wish I'd known earlier, because being an undiagnosed teen with Asperger's is hell. But in hindsight, I do question whether I might not have done as much with my life and actually tried as many things out, because I might have been defined by the label.
What did you make of Jim Carrey and Jenny McCarthy there?
I get very annoyed. The evidence is overwhelming that MMR does not cause it, it's genetic, and the fact is children are not getting vaccinated against childhood illnesses that were almost eradicated, and everybody's children has been affected because the herd's immunisation levels is coming down. So I'm really get quite annoyed when I see them. You know, I feel very strongly for them. You know, I understand they want to do the best thing by Evan, but they're not doing the best thing by everyone else's children.
Now, Edwin, you went there with the show. We'll talk about the Gabrielle character presently, but you had an activist character who was handing out leaflets on the association between vaccines and autism. Why did you go there?
Well, we wanted to explore exactly that issue. I mean, we were aware of Jenny McCarthy's stand and of Jim Carrey, and what we wanted to do was, I guess, play both sides, so that we had what their medical establishment said, we had what other people were saying, and to explore that emotion, because it is really, it must be extremely hard to have a child with this condition, and you know, it's understandable that people are looking for answers all the time. And the character in question had a brother with Asperger's, and so we wanted to you know, explore how she was dealing with that and how she really wanted to help any way she could.
How even-handed was it safe to be with that, though? Because I know that there were some commentators, Rachel Cunliffe at Throng, thought you didn't emphasise what the scientific consensus was strongly enough there.
Perhaps, yeah. It's hard. There are many myths that exist around this connection, and I guess to work through them would have taken a whole episode all by itself.
I'm guessing that you got a fairly good look at that controversy and discussing things in the autism community, because there's some bitter politics around that, isn't there?
Yeah, really bitter politics. And there are definitely, I could tell there are people who are completely still convinced of the link between MMR and autism and who don't vaccinate their kids, and their views will never change, even though there's no scientific evidence to support that. But really strong feelings and a big division in the autism community about that.
Is that understandable, given that people, there's a certain grieving process in getting a diagnosis, isn't there? And I think that maybe that drives people to...
Yeah, I think when people talk about it being bandied around as a diagnosis, no parent wants their kid to be Asperger's or autistic. You know, it's not what you choose or want for your kid. You want to understand them. But I think parents are desperate to find any reason for why it happens, and also they want to do anything they can. I'd try anything too. I think there's just a fine line between exploiting a parent's desperation to try and do something, because for a lot of parents that's expensive, and it also carries a lot of guilt that you've somehow done something that's caused this, and it's not that. I mean, I think all the evidence suggests that it's really strongly genetic.
Well, we'll take a break now, and when we come back, we'll look at autism in the culture.